The motherboard is a thin, usually green printed circuit board that holds all the ports for every component a PC needs. The motherboard also tells you what parts you can and can't use because only certain parts are compatible with each other. For example, ATX versus BTX. Since this circuit board includes ports for all the parts of a computer, it allows for every single component to communicate with each other.
Next, we have the power supply. The power supply is the component that supplies electricity to the entire PC. It connects to an outlet that sends alternating currents through the cables, which then converts it to direct current. It is directly connected to the motherboard to power it up, and also to the optical and hard drives. When installing the power supply, you want to make sure that you tuck all cables so that none are covering the motherboard to promote airflow.
The CPU is a chip attached to the motherboard that carries out instructions given from the hard drive and RAM. The hard drive sends instructions such as opening a program, which the CPU then carries out. Once that is done, the instructions are stored in the RAM so that the program can be opened at a faster rate while the computer is still turned on.
Here we have the Heatsink Cooling Fan. The heatsink captures all the heat from the CPU, while the cooling fan blows heat away from the CPU. When the CPU overheats, this will cause the PC to shut down.
RAM is an acronym for Random Access Memory, which is a type of memory that can be accessed randomly, hence the name. The difference between RAM and hard drives is that RAM can be accessed very quickly so that the computer wastes no time in retrieving information. This information is stored in the form of instructions. The instructions are for programs that have been opened so that the CPU can open said program quicker. The RAM works side by side with the CPU both literally and figuratively and is only in use while the computer is on to get the lightning fast responses. So, when the computer is turned off, all the memory being used on the RAM is wiped.
Here we see the optical drive. The optical drive refers to the component that allows the PC to read the DVDs and CDs. It is powered directly through the power supply through a SATA power cable and sends video data through a SATA data cable. The data is sent through the motherboard to the graphics card where it carries out the function as a video that we see through our screens.
The hard drive is where all your files are physically stored and where the operating system rests as well. They all have a read-write functionality which allows you to save files and documents to the hard drive, the write functionality, and also access a file document that has been previously saved to the drive, which is the read functionality. The hard drive works in conjunction with the CPU and RAM because it sends the instructions to open a program to the CPU through a SATA cable where it then carries out the instructions and then saves the instructions in the RAM so that it can carry out the function much quicker.
SATA power and data cables are any cable that is connected to any drive such as a hard drive or optical drive. They are usually cables that vary in size and shape. The SATA data cables are connected to the drive and then the motherboard so that it communicates with the CPU and any other component through the cable. The SATA power cables are connected directly to the power supply to provide power to the drive. The BIOS chip is a chip that contains a small program called BIOS. BIOS controls the computer from the time it powers on until the operating system takes over. BIOS is a firmware, therefore it cannot store variable data. It also controls the hardware and performs a power on self-test called the post test to make sure that everything is running correctly.
CMOS is short for complementary metal oxide semiconductor. CMOS is an onboard battery-powered semiconductor chip inside computers that stores hardware settings or information. So, when you make changes to the BIOS configurations, the settings are not stored on the BIOS chip itself. Instead, they are stored on the CMOS chip, which is why the CMOS has its own battery. The battery provides continuous power to the chip so that the BIOS settings are always stored even while the machine is off.
Last but not least is the chipset. The chipset is a collection of integrated circuits that control the data flow between components. Any and all data has to go through the chipset, essentially acting as a traffic control tower. It receives data from one component and directs it to the proper component it's trying to communicate with. The north side chipset is integrated into the CPU, which controls data flow between the CPU, RAM, and PCI slots for graphics cards. These are the fastest components on the motherboard, which is why it's separate from the south side chipset. The south side chipset consists of the slower components that don't require speed, such as the hard drive, the external ports, and BIOS.